The warehouse smelled like rust and rain. Outside, Milan wept against corrugated walls. Inside, 12 men stood in a circle of amber light, and one gun was aimed at a woman's chest. She was 63 years old. She had silver hair and rosary beads twisted between her fingers. The man holding the gun was not afraid. That was the most dangerous kind of man. Alfonso Dalmasso stood 10 feet away, still as stone, the tattoo across his knuckles white against the grip of his own weapon. He would have moved. He always moved. But she was faster. The girl nobody had accounted for stepped directly into the line of fire, and the entire room stopped breathing. Sometimes love begins not with a whisper, but with a woman willing to die for a stranger. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe. 3 weeks earlier, Talia Mancuso had been sitting in a sterile government office in Rome, watching her career dissolve in real time. The letter from the Ministry of Justice was polite. It always was, when they were ruining your life with bureaucratic efficiency. Due to restructuring of the Financial Crimes Translation Unit, your contract will not be renewed. Talia folded it once. Twice. Tucked it into her bag alongside her transit pass and a half-eaten granola bar. She did not cry. She had learned very young that tears were a currency best spent in private. She was 31. She spoke 4 languages fluently: Italian, English, Sicilian dialect, and enough Albanian to follow a conversation in a crowded room. She had a law degree she'd never used because the bar exam cost money she didn't have the year her mother got sick. She had a reputation for accuracy, discretion, and a refusal to be intimidated by anyone in a tailored suit. That last quality she would soon discover was going to be either her greatest asset or her cause of death. The Dalmasso family's estate sat 40 minutes outside Milan, tucked behind stone walls and ancient cypress trees that had been growing since before Mussolini was born. Talia had been there exactly once before. 5 years ago, translating during a legal dispute involving a shipping contract that may or may not have been entirely legitimate. She hadn't asked. That was the first rule of working adjacent to power. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. She'd been hired back now through a third-party legal firm. The Dalmassos needed a forensic accountant translator for a 6-month contract. Someone who could parse financial documents in 3 languages and keep their mouth shut. The pay was extraordinary. The risk was implied but never stated. Talia had looked at her bank account, then at the letter from the ministry, then back at the bank account. She packed a bag. The man who met her at the gate was not Alfonso Dalmasso. He was compact and watchful, with a scar along his jaw that suggested he'd been in at least one knife fight. He introduced himself as Marco, gave no last name, and led her through a courtyard where the fountain had been turned off for winter. The estate was beautiful in the way that power always was, cold and deliberate. Every stone placed to impress. Every window angled to observe. She was shown to a guest wing on the east side of the main house. Her room had a writing desk, an ensuite bathroom, and a window that looked out over the formal garden. There were fresh flowers on the dresser. Someone had thought to put them there. She didn't know if that was kindness or theater. Probably theater, she thought, and unpacked her laptop. She didn't meet Alfonso until her 3rd day on the estate. She had been working in the document room, a converted library on the ground floor, floor-to-ceiling shelves, long mahogany table, the perpetual smell of old paper, when the door opened without a knock. She didn't look up. She was mid-sentence in a financial translation and losing her place was annoying. "The Mancuso woman," said a voice. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an introduction. It was the verbal equivalent of opening a file cabinet. Efficient, impersonal, faintly dismissive. That made her look up. He was taller than she'd expected, though she didn't know why she'd had expectations. He wore a dark charcoal suit, jacket open, no tie. The collar of his shirt was loosened exactly 1 button. Along his forearm, where his sleeve was rolled to the elbow, a tattoo ran in dense black script. Italian, old dialect, the words curling over the tendons of his wrist like a living thing. She recognized the phrase. Sang Kayama sang. Blood calls to blood. His face was composed. Dark eyes, strong jaw, the kind of stillness that came not from calm but from absolute control. He was perhaps 38. He looked like a man who had been born already tired of being underestimated. "Dalmasso," she said, because she wouldn't pretend she didn't know who he was. Something shifted in his expression. Barely. A fractional recalibration, like a compass needle finding north. You're ahead of schedule, he said. I work faster when people don't interrupt me. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was measuring. He looked at the documents spread across her table. At the color-coded notes she'd made in 3 different inks. At the organizational system she'd built from scratch in 72 hours that would have taken his previous team 2 weeks. Continue, he said and left. She went back to her translation. Her pen didn't shake. He was proud of that. There were unspoken rules and Talia learned them the way she learned everything, by watching. Rule 1. Don't enter the east courtyard after dark. Ever. Rule 2. When Alfonso was in a meeting the house went quiet. Not politely quiet. Surgically quiet. Rule 3. His mother, Donna Lucia, was untouchable. Not in the mobwife sense. In the genuine reverent sense. Men who would put a knife through someone's hand without blinking stopped to hold doors for her. Talia met Donna Lucia on her 4th day. The old woman came to the document room herself, which apparently was unusual enough that Marco appeared in the doorway behind her with the expression of a man watching someone casually juggle explosives. Donna Lucia was small, white-haired, precise. She wore black the way some women wore armor. She sat across from Talia without asking permission, folded her hands, and studied her with dark eyes that had clearly seen everything and forgotten nothing. You're not afraid, Donna Lucia said. I'm here voluntarily, Talia said. Fear seemed redundant. The old woman laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and sudden and completely at odds with everything around her. My son hired 3 translators before you, she said. The first 2 lasted a week each. The third lasted 4 days and then asked to be driven to the train station at 2 in the morning. What happened to frighten them? Donna Lucia tilted her head. They made the mistake of understanding what they were reading. Talia met her eyes. I understand exactly what I'm reading. Another silence. Another assessment. Good, said Donna Lucia. And then more softly, then you are either very brave or very foolish. Possibly both, Talia said. The old woman patted her hand once, stood and left. Marco looked visibly relieved. The work was complex and Talia found it interesting in the way that puzzles were interesting. Morally neutral, intellectually engaging. She was not being asked to falsify anything. She was being asked to translate and cross-reference financial records across 3 jurisdictions, identifying discrepancies. That was forensic accounting. That was legal. What the family intended to do with that information was not her department. She told herself this at night, when the estate was quiet and the garden was silver with moonlight and she could hear, faintly, men speaking in low voices somewhere in the courtyard she wasn't supposed to enter. She was very good at telling herself things. Alfonso returned to the document room 4 times in the first week. Each time without announcement. Each time for a different stated reason. A specific document, a question about her timeline, a clarification on a Sicilian legal term that had 3 possible translations. He was testing her, she realized. Not her work. Her. He was watching to see what she did when he entered a room. Whether she straightened. Whether she softened. Whether she performed. She did none of those things. She answered his questions and went back to work. On the 5th visit he stayed longer. He stood at the shelves, his back to her, looking at the old ledgers she hadn't needed yet. The tattoo on his forearm caught the lamplight. She noticed the way he held himself, completely still, as though movement were something he permitted only when necessary. How long did it take you to learn Sicilian dialect? He asked. My grandmother spoke it, she said without looking up. I grew up hearing it. Your grandmother was from? Palermo. Originally. He turned slightly. Mancuso is a Sicilian name. It is. Do you have family there still? She set her pen down and looked at him directly. Mr. Dalmasso. Are you asking because it's relevant to the contract or because you're running a background check through conversation? He held her gaze. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, brief, like the flicker of a candle in a draft. Both? He said with an honesty that startled her. She picked her pen back up. My grandmother died 6 years ago. No other family in Sicily. My father was Roman. My mother is in a care facility in Florence. She has Alzheimer's. That's why I took this contract. The pay covers her facility for 2 years. She paused. Now you know. You're welcome. He said nothing. She didn't look up. When she finally did 5 minutes later, he was gone. The summons came on a Wednesday. Not from Alfonso. From Donna Lucia herself, delivered by a young woman named Sarah who appeared at Talia's door at 6 in the evening with a handwritten note that simply said, "Join me for dinner." Oh. The private dining room was smaller than the formal one. A round table for chairs, only 2 set. Candles and no overhead lighting. Wine already poured. A dark Sicilian red that Talia's grandmother would have approved of. Donna Lucia was already seated when she arrived. She gestured to the chair across from her as though they were old friends. "My son doesn't know you're here," she said immediately. "Should I be concerned about that?" "Probably not." She lifted her wine. "He knows I do as I please." Talia sat. The food was simple and extraordinary, pasta dressed in a way that tasted like memory. "I want to talk to you about something," Donna Lucia said. "Something I haven't told Alfonso." Talia went still. "There has been a threat." The old woman's voice was perfectly level. "Against me specifically. From a man named Renato Voss. He and Alfonso have history. Unresolved business. Voss has communicated that he intends to use me as leverage." "Why are you telling me?" Talia asked carefully. "Because you're not one of his men." Donna Lucia looked at her steadily. "And because I need someone watching who isn't already part of the machinery. His men love him but they think like soldiers. I need someone who thinks like a civilian." "With respect," Talia said, "I'm a translator. I'm not security." "No," Donna Lucia agreed. "But you're observant. And you're not afraid." She paused. "I am telling you so that if something happens, if you see something wrong, you will not freeze." Talia looked at this small, precise, white-haired woman and understood very clearly that she was being asked to be brave on behalf of someone who had every right to expect it of her own son's empire, and for reasons she might never fully understand, had chosen Talia instead. "All right," she said. "I'll watch." Donna Lucia reached across the table and pressed her hand briefly. The rosary beads at her wrist clicked softly. "Don't tell Alfonso," she said. Talia didn't. The legal firm sent a liaison the following week. His name was Edoardo Ricci, tall, easy-smiled, the kind of handsome that came from good genetics and zero hardship. He was there to review Talia's preliminary findings and carry them back to the partners. He arrived mid-morning and immediately made himself at home in the document room, which Talia had spent 11 days building into exactly the organized workspace she needed. He moved a stack of her files to make room for his laptop. She moved them back. He laughed. "Sorry, force of habit." "Don't worry about it," she said, and did not mean it warmly. But Edoardo was persistent in the cheerful, low-stakes way of men who had never been told no and hadn't yet encountered a reason to change. He asked her questions about her background. Complimented her system. Offered to take her to dinner in Milan when the contract wrapped. Just colleagues, he said, which meant nothing and everything. She was professionally polite. Nothing more. She didn't notice Alfonso until he was already in the room. He stood at the doorway, jacket on, the tattoo along his wrist disappearing beneath his cuff as he held the door frame lightly with one hand. He was watching Edoardo. His face was entirely neutral. That neutrality, Talia had learned, was the most dangerous version of his face. "Dalmasso," Edoardo said, standing quickly. "I was just reviewing Ms. Mancuso's progress. Outstanding work, truly." "I need the Voss shipping records by Friday," Alfonso said. Not to Edoardo. "Talia. You'll have them Thursday," she said. He looked at her then. Just for a moment. Something precise and unreadable in his eyes. Then he was gone. Edoardo exhaled. "God. He's intense." "He's focused," Talia said, and went back to work. That evening she found that her window had been repaired. A latch that had been stiff since she arrived now opened smoothly. A new lamp had appeared on her writing desk, positioned exactly where she'd have placed it herself if she'd had the choice. The draft from the hallway door had been sealed with new weather stripping. No note. No explanation. She stood in the middle of her room for a long moment, looking at these small, silent alterations. Then she sat down at the newly lit desk and tried not to think too hard about what they meant. Alfonso didn't tell himself stories about the Mancuso woman. He was not a man who indulged in narratives. He dealt in facts. She was a contractor. Skilled, discreet, unflinching in the particular way of someone who had learned that flinching cost more than it protected. She was not afraid of him, which was either foolish or extraordinary, and he had not yet decided which. She had told him about her mother without sentimentality and without looking for sympathy. That had done something to his chest that he didn't examine. He had not meant to fix her window. He had noticed it, mentioned it to Marco, and Marco had handled it, which was how things worked in his world. The lamp had been his mother's suggestion. The weather stripping he could not explain. He stayed out of the document room for 4 days. He watched the security footage instead, which was worse. On the 5th day he had business to handle. Renato Voss had been quiet, too quiet, and Alfonso's instincts, which had kept him alive through 17 years of escalating responsibility and 3 attempts on his life, were telling him that quiet from Voss meant movement he couldn't yet see. He called a meeting in the East Courtyard. The men who attended were the kind of men whose names didn't appear on any official documentation connected to the Dalmasso family. The kind of men who understood that their loyalty was the only currency that mattered. He spoke for 20 minutes. He listened for 10. He made 3 decisions. None of them were about Talia Mancuso. But when Marco mentioned at the end of the meeting that the liaison from the legal firm had requested to return next week, Alfonso said, "Tell them to send someone else," and didn't explain why. Marco didn't ask. She found out. Of course she found out. She was a forensic accountant with access to the estate's administrative correspondence, and she had specifically been asked to cross-reference communication records. The request to the legal firm was there, routing Eduardo Ricci to a different contract. She waited until evening. She found Alfonso in the study on the 2nd floor. A room she'd been in twice before for work-related reasons, always with Marco present. Marco was not present now. She closed the door behind her. He was at his desk, reading, sleeves rolled up. The tattoo along his forearm, Sang Kayama Sang, was fully visible in the lamplight. He looked up without surprise, which meant he'd heard her coming. "You redirected Ricci," she said. "Pause." "Yes. He was part of my review process. He was supposed to. I sent his firm a replacement. I didn't ask for a replacement. I didn't ask for anything to change." He set down whatever he was reading. Gave her his full attention, which was, she was discovering, a profoundly uncomfortable thing to receive. "He was distracting you," Alfonso said. "He absolutely was not. He moved your files. I moved them back. He was going to ask you to dinner." The room went very quiet. The fire in the corner made small, patient sounds. "That," Talia said carefully, "is not your business. Everything on this estate is my business. I am not on this estate. I am working on this estate. There is a difference. I am a contractor with a signed agreement and a very clear scope of work. My personal life. Stay." He said it simply. Not commanding. Not begging. Something in between that had no good name. She stopped. "I'm not asking you to account for yourself," he said. His voice was quieter now. The control was still there, but it was working harder than usual. "I'm telling you that this," he gestured between them, though they were 10 feet apart and nothing had ever happened. "I'm telling you that I notice things." "What things?" He looked at her for a long moment. The tattoo flexed as his hand tightened slightly on the arm of his chair. "The way you rearranged the document room in the first hour," he said. "The fact that you eat the same lunch every day but you've tried 3 different teas. That you read for exactly 40 minutes before you sleep. I can see your light. That you corrected my Sicilian dialect during our 2nd meeting and then immediately apologized, and you should never have apologized because you were right." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever stood inside. "Alfonso," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. She watched him absorb it. "You can't do this. I know. I work for you. I know. This world," she gestured vaguely at the walls, "the estate, the weight of everything the stone and the shadows implied, is not mine. I'm not equipped for it. I've seen what it does to people who get pulled in without armor." "What did it do?" A beat of silence. Then quietly, "My father owed money to people like you. He spent 3 years trying to pay it back. The interest was designed so he never could. He died still trying." She kept her voice steady. "I was 19. Something moved across Alfonso's face, swift and involuntary and almost tender. "That's not what I am," he said. I know exactly what you are, she said. I've been reading your financial records for 2 weeks. He almost smiled. It was barely visible, a softening at the corner of his mouth. Under any other circumstances it would have been devastating. Go back to your room, he said softly. Lock your door if it makes you feel better. It won't, she said honestly. She left anyway. She did not lock the door. She threw herself into the work. The Voss shipping records were dense and deliberately obfuscated. Shell companies folded inside shell companies, currency conversions timed to exploit reporting thresholds, the kind of architecture that required both a lawyer's precision and a criminal's creativity to build. Talia worked 12-hour days and ate at her desk and filled 3 notebooks with cross-referenced annotations. Alfonso did not come to the document room. She told herself she didn't notice. She noticed. On the second day, Donna Lucia stopped by with 2 cups of espresso and sat across from her without speaking for a while, which Talia had discovered was simply how the woman operated. She would sit in silence until she decided to speak, and the silence was not awkward, it was companionable. He's brooding, Donna Lucia said eventually. I wouldn't know, Talia said. You would know. You just prefer not to confirm it. Talia looked up. Donna Lucia. He hasn't brooded over a woman since Chiara. That was 8 years ago. It ended badly. She wanted a normal life and he couldn't offer one. He's never tried again. We're not. I know what we're not. The old woman's eyes were very dark and very clear. I'm telling you what is. Talia set her pen down. It doesn't change anything. No, Donna Lucia agreed. It rarely does at first. She finished her espresso, patted Talia's hand and left. Talia stared at the shipping records for a long time without seeing them. On the 3rd day she found something. Buried inside a subsidiary's quarterly filing, cross-referenced against a routing number she'd flagged 2 days earlier. A payment. Large. Routed through 3 jurisdictions. Destination. A property management company in northern Milan. She knew that company. She'd seen it in 2 other documents. She knew the address associated with it. Her stomach went cold. She sat very still for a moment, then picked up the internal phone line Marco had shown her on her first day. I need to speak with Alfonso, she said. Tonight. He came within 20 minutes. He was in a different suit, darker, the jacket unbuttoned. The tattoo at his collarbone was just visible above his open collar, black script against warm skin. She made herself not look at it. She spread the documents across the table and walked him through it. Methodically. Precisely. The way she would have explained it to a prosecutor if the world had been a different shape. He listened without interrupting. His expression revealed nothing, but the quality of his attention was absolute. The kind of focus that meant he was integrating everything and filing it in real time. When she finished, he was quiet. How long? He said. The payment started 18 months ago. But the infrastructure goes back further. Maybe 3 years. And the property address. Yes. She met his eyes. I recognized it from an earlier filing. It's associated with your mother's charitable foundation. The silence was total. She watched him process this, not with panic, not with visible rage, but with the slow, terrible settling of a man absorbing a betrayal so close to home that it required a moment to fully land. Someone inside this house, he said. Not a question. That's the most likely interpretation. He stood. Walked to the window. His hand against the glass showed the tattoo across his knuckles. Sang Kayama sang, pale against the dark night. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Telling me. I know. She paused. Alfonso. Your mother told me something a week ago. She watched him turn. She told me about the threat from Voss. She asked me not to tell you. A breath. I think you need to know. The look on his face was complicated, not anger exactly. Something more layered. The expression of a man recalibrating multiple things at once. She came to you, he said. She didn't want to worry you. She went around my entire security apparatus to confide in a contractor she'd known for 2 weeks. I think she trusted that I wasn't already part of the system. That I'd see clearly. He looked at her for a long time. The fire was lower now, the room dimmer. In the half-light, the controlled composure he maintained like a second skin looked, for just a moment, like something it cost him. Stay close to her tomorrow, he said. Don't make it obvious. Can you do that? Yes. Thank you. It was very quiet. Very direct. She nodded and began gathering her papers. Talia. He said her name the way Italians said names. Fully, deliberately, with every syllable given its weight. She looked up. Lock your door tonight, he said. Actually. She understood from his tone that this was no longer metaphor. All right, she said. She locked it. The call came at 11:17. Talia heard raised voices through the wall. Distant but sharp-edged, the particular sound of men moving quickly with purpose rather than panic. She was already at her desk, not quite able to sleep, and she was at her door in seconds. Marco appeared in the hallway. His face was controlled but his eyes were different. Stay in your room, he said. What's happening? Ms. Mancuso. Where is Donna Lucia? He hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. He was already moving. She heard them before she saw them. A loading bay at the rear of the estate. She hadn't known it existed, had only found it by following the sounds through a servant's corridor she'd memorized in her first week out of habit. The door was open. Rain came through it sideways, silver and cold. Inside, 12 men. The amber light of emergency lanterns. The geometry of a standoff. Donna Lucia stood at the center of it, rosary beads in both hands, her white hair precise despite everything. The man in front of her was not Alfonso. He was thick-shouldered and pale-eyed and held his weapon with the comfort of long practice. Renato Voss. She'd seen his photograph in the financial records. Alfonso was 10 feet away, utterly still, the tattoo across his knuckles vivid white against the grip of his own weapon. His face was stone. His eyes were calculating the variables with the speed of a man who had spent his entire life doing exactly this. But there were too many of Voss's men. And Voss had the angle. Talia understood this in the half-second it took her to take in the room. She understood it the way she understood financial architecture, by seeing the whole structure and identifying where it would collapse. Voss was going to pull the trigger. Maybe not tonight. Maybe in the next 60 seconds. But Alfonso couldn't move without Donna Lucia taking the bullet, and Voss knew it, and that was the entire point. She didn't make a decision. She simply moved. Through the door. Across the wet concrete floor. Between Donna Lucia and the gun. The room went absolutely silent. She stood with her back to Voss, facing Donna Lucia, who looked at her with an expression that was, impossibly, not afraid. The rosary beads were very still. Don't, Talia said softly to the old woman. To herself. To the room. Behind her she heard Voss make a sound. Not a shot. A laugh, short, disbelieving. Who is this? He said. Nobody answered him. She felt Alfonso before she saw him. He had moved in the second of Voss's distraction, changed his angle, redistributed the entire geometry of the room. His men were moving too, quietly, using the moment Talia had created. It was not over. But the balance had shifted. She kept her eyes on Donna Lucia's face. The old woman reached out and took her hand. The rosary beads pressed into Talia's palm, warm from being held. Thank you, Donna Lucia whispered. Don't thank me yet, Talia whispered back. What happened in the next 4 minutes she could not have narrated in order afterward. There were sounds. There was controlled violence. The specific efficient kind that doesn't look like what you see in films. There was a moment when Voss's voice rose and then very suddenly didn't. And then Alfonso was in front of her. He was breathing slightly faster than normal. One hand on her shoulder, not her arm, and the difference felt significant without her being able to say why. Are you hurt? He said. No. He looked at her face for what felt like a very long time. You stepped in front of a gun, he said. Your mother was standing there. You stepped in front of a gun. I noticed. She exhaled. Her hands were shaking slightly now, which she acknowledged and set aside. Is she all right? He turned briefly to confirm what he could already see. Donna Lucia seated on a crate, Marco beside her, unhurt and steady. Then he turned back. His hand was still on her shoulder. The tattoo at his collarbone was visible above his open collar. Black script against skin that was warm and present and absolutely real. Talia. His voice was very low. I need you to understand something. Not right now, she said. She was looking at his face and trying to memorize it, which was a strange thing to be doing, and she couldn't stop. Yes, he said. Right now. Alfonso. You are not a contractor anymore, he said. You are not a consultant or a visitor or a woman with a 6-month agreement. Whatever happened to your life before this estate, whatever you thought this was going to be, that changed tonight. You understand? The rain was still coming through the open bay door. Her hair was wet. The rosary beads were still in her hand. I understand that I'm standing in a warehouse in the middle of the night after walking in front of a weapon, she said. I'm not sure I'm equipped to understand much else at the moment. He looked at her. She looked at him. The amber lantern light made the tattoo across his knuckles red like fire. I'll wait, he said. He was not talking about tonight. She knew that. She didn't say so. But she also did not let go of the rosary beads. The night did not end cleanly. Voss was gone, taken or fled, the details kept deliberately from her. Alfonso installed 3 additional security details before dawn. Donna Lucia drank chamomile tea in the kitchen and told stories about Sicily that made 2 of the guards laugh, which Talia suspected was intentional. And Talia sat at the kitchen table in wet clothes with a blanket around her shoulders and understood, in the quiet way of someone who has passed a point of no return, that she was not leaving. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Alfonso sat across from her and said nothing and was somehow, impossibly, the most present person she had ever been in a room with. The estate breathed around them. The night ticked slowly toward morning. She was safe. The threat was not. Because Renato Voss had not been captured. He had simply vanished. And the man who'd been inside the house, moving money through Donna Lucia's foundation for 3 years, was still there. Talia had found the transactions. But she hadn't yet found the name. The name was someone she had already met. And it was going to change everything. Dawn came pale and wet over the cypress trees. Talia had not slept. She'd gone back to her room at some point after 4 in the morning, changed out of her damp clothes, and sat at the writing desk while the lamplight competed with the gray creeping under her curtains. The rosary beads were on the desk in front of her. She hadn't meant to keep them. She'd meant to return them to Donna Lucia at the first opportunity. But somehow, through the chaos of the kitchen and the blanket and the guards and the silence, she'd walked away with them still in her hand. She turned them over now slowly. Wood and silver worn smooth by decades of being held. She thought about her grandmother who had kept a similar set. Who had told her once that prayer was not about asking for things. It's about reminding yourself that some forces are larger than your fear. He thought about the gun. The way the room had gone silent when she moved. She thought about Alfonso's hand on her shoulder. Solid, present, the kind of touch that didn't take anything. She thought about the name she hadn't found yet. She opened her laptop. She had the name by 7:30 in the morning. She sat with it for a full 10 minutes before she did anything, because finding it meant that everything that followed would be different, and she had learned, from her father, from the ministry, from 3 weeks on this estate, that you couldn't unknow a thing. The name was Marco. Not his signature. Not a direct trail. Something more careful than that. A proxy, a timing alignment, a particular pattern of access that only made sense if you knew what to look for and had been looking at the right documents in the right order. Who had been with Alfonso for 11 years. Who had met her at the gate. Who had put fresh flowers on her dresser and shown her the internal phone line and stood behind Donna Lucia in the kitchen at 4 in the morning looking. She now understood, not concerned but watchful. He closed the laptop. Opened it again. Stared at the numbers until they were irrefutable. Then she did something she hadn't done since she was 19 years old. Sitting in a hospital waiting room while men in expensive suits walked past her like she didn't exist. She was afraid. She did not call the internal phone line. She found Alfonso herself in the east courtyard, standing with 2 men she didn't recognize. He saw her come through the gate and said something to the men that dismissed them without a word. She crossed the wet stone toward him. He watched her come. The morning light was thin and cold and the tattoo along his wrist was visible where his jacket sleeve had shifted. You slept, he said. No. She stopped 4 feet from him. I need to tell you something. He read her expression. His own face changed. Infinitesimally, but she was learning to read the small changes. Not here, he said. They went to the study. She walked him through it the same way she'd walked him through the Voss accounts. Methodically, document by document, pattern by pattern. She did not editorialize. She presented the architecture and let it speak. When she finished, he was standing at the window with his back to her. 11 years, she thought. That was what 11 years of loyalty meant in this world. It meant being the man who knew every door, every protocol, every weakness. It meant being the man who had arranged the standoff last night. He gave Voss the layout, Alfonso said. Not a question. That's what the timing suggests. He's been here since. He stopped. My father hired him. She didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. He turned. The tattoo across his knuckles was taut as his hand closed at his side. The script, Sankayama sang, seemed in this light to accuse. Are you certain? He said. I'm certain about the financial trail. What it means operationally is your judgment to make. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his expression was very contained and very painful, and she understood that she was seeing something he almost never showed. Not grief exactly, but the shadow grief casts. All right, he said quietly. All right. Alfonso. She waited until he looked at her. Be careful. If he knows you know. I know how to handle this. I know you do. I'm asking you to be careful anyway. He looked at her for a moment that stretched and held. Why? He said. She understood what he was really asking. She answered the real question. Because, she said, I've decided I'd like you to still be here at the end of the week. His expression did something small and devastating. Go back to your room, he said softly. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Donna Lucia. What are you going to? Talia. Her name in his voice was a complete sentence. Please. She went. She stayed in her room for 4 hours. She heard nothing alarming, no raised voices, no sounds of violence. The estate had that particular quality of held breath that she was learning to associate with Alfonso handling things. At noon, Donna Lucia appeared at her door. The old woman looked tired but entirely herself, composed, dark-eyed, carrying 2 plates of food with the matter-of-fact energy of someone who had survived worse and intended to keep surviving. She came in without asking. Sat in the chair at the writing desk. Set 1 plate in front of Talia. Eat, she said. Talia ate. My son told me, Donna Lucia said after a while. About Marco? Yes. She looked at the rosary beads still on the desk. Didn't reach for them. Marco came to this family when Alfonso was 27. Fresh out of a situation that had left him with no references, no prospects, and a need that my husband recognized. She paused. My husband was not always kind, but he was shrewd. He saw potential. He gave Marco a place. And Marco repaid that with 11 years of excellent service and then, apparently, with a choice that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with fear. He picked up her fork. Voss had something on him. Alfonso believes that now. Doesn't make it forgivable. But it's true. Talia looked at her plate. Is Marco gone? Donna Lucia said simply. As of 2 hours ago. Alfonso handled it cleanly. There will be no violence if Marco cooperates, which he has. She said this with the pragmatic calm of a woman who had learned to distinguish between the categories of outcome. He'll disappear. It's better than he deserves and more humane than the alternative. Alfonso chose mercy. Alfonso chose efficiency. A slight smile. They sometimes look the same from the outside. Talia thought about that. About a man who had the power to do worse and chose not to. About whether that distinction mattered in the long run. He thought it might. Alfonso came to her room that evening. He knocked. She noticed he knocked. She opened the door and he stood in the hallway in his shirt sleeves, the tattoo along his forearm fully visible, a glass of wine in each hand. He held one out. I thought you'd want to know, he said. Voss has been located. He's being discouraged from further operations. Discouraged, she repeated. Aggressively, he confirmed. He took the wine. And the foundation accounts? Your documentation goes to 3 lawyers tomorrow. The foundation will be restructured. My mother's money is protected. He paused. You made that possible. I did the job I was hired for. You did considerably more than that. She held the door slightly. He was in the hallway. He was in the room. The geometry of it felt meaningful. Come in, she said. If you want. He came in. He sat in the chair at the writing desk, the same chair Donna Lucia had used earlier. She sat on the edge of the bed, which was the only other option, and they drank their wine, and she told him about her grandmother and the rosary beads and the prayer that wasn't really prayer, and he listened the way he did everything, completely without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My father had a saying," he said. In Sicilian. Roughly translated, "A man who fears nothing protects nothing." He turned his glass slowly. "I used to think it was about courage. I understand now it was about love." She looked at him. "He was afraid," Alfonso said. "Every day he ran this family. For my mother. For us. The fear was the point. It meant something was worth protecting." He paused. "I understand that better now than I did a month ago." She understood what he meant by now. She understood why he was telling her. "Alfonso," she said softly. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I know you're not. That's why I'm not running." The room was very quiet. The lamplight, the lamp he'd put there without being asked, made everything warm. He set down his glass. She set down hers. He was still in the chair and she was still on the edge of the bed, and there was perhaps 4 feet of space between them, and in that space for a long and suspended moment, everything that had not been said existed at full volume. He stood slowly. Crossed toward her. Stopped within arm's reach. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. "I have spent 17 years, he said very quietly, "being exactly what this family required. I have not allowed myself anything I couldn't afford to lose." He exhaled. "I don't know how to do this differently." "You're doing it," she said. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips barely touched her jaw. The tattoo on his wrist was at eye level, the ancient words worn now like a second skin. "I'm learning," he said. She turned her face slightly into his hand. It was a small movement. Said everything. His forehead came down to meet hers. Shared breath. The unbearable weight of restraint. Cut to black. 3 days later she packed a bag. Not because of Alfonso. Not because anything had gone wrong between them. If anything, something had settled, like a question finding its answer. They had eaten breakfast together twice. He had shown her the estate's greenhouse, where Donna Lucia grew tomatoes in defiance of the northern climate. He had laughed, actually laughed, at something she said about the accounting software the legal firm used. She packed because a letter arrived from the care facility in Florence. Her mother had had a bad week. Not medically dangerous, not yet, but a significant decline in recognition. The staff was recommending a specialist consultation. There were decisions to be made, and they required someone with power of attorney to make them in person. She sat on the bed with the letter for a long time. Then she pulled her bag from the wardrobe. He found her in the corridor 20 minutes later. She had her coat on, bag in hand, and the look on his face when he saw it, the involuntary stilling of every controlled feature, was the single most human thing she'd ever seen on him. "My mother," she said immediately, because she couldn't let him think the alternative. "She needs me. In Florence." He absorbed this. The tension in his jaw didn't disappear, but it recalibrated. "How long?" "A week. Maybe 2. She paused. "I'm coming back. To finish the contract." She stopped. "I'm coming back." He held her gaze. The tattoo on his knuckles was stark as he carried the silence. "I'll arrange transport," he said. "I can take the train." "I'll arrange transport," he said again. Quietly. Irrevocably. She let him. The car that took her to Florence was black and private and driven by a man who introduced himself only as Sal. There was water in the door pocket and a note on the seat written in Alfonso's handwriting. Just an address and a phone number, and beneath it in Italian, "Call if anything is needed." Anything. She held the note for most of the drive. Her mother was in a private room with a window that looked over a garden that wasn't quite keeping up with itself. Slightly overgrown, the way things got when attention was spread too thin. Talia sat beside the bed and held her mother's hand and answered questions about people who had been dead for years as though they were still alive, because what else could she do? Her mother asked twice about her father. Talia said he was well. She said it without flinching. That was the only kindness she had left to give. Alfonso called on the second evening. She picked up on the second ring, which she acknowledged to herself as pathetic and didn't correct. "How is she?" he said. "Stable." Confused. "Herself in the ways that matter." She was on the balcony of the small hotel near the facility. Florence in February was cold and beautiful. The specialist was helpful. We have a plan. Good. Boss. The legal firm sent their new liaison today. Is he competent? And yes. Though she rearranged the document room. She's right too. I organized it for me, not for someone with a different workflow. I told her not to touch anything. Talia closed her eyes. Alfonso. She put things back. Good. Boss. She could hear the quality of his silence, full, warm, slightly reluctant. I miss the way the room smelled, he said. When you worked in it. She didn't say anything for a moment. That's the most alarming thing you've ever said to me, she said finally. I'm aware. She could hear the almost smile. I'm coming back in 5 days, she said. I know. Try not to redecorate anything while I'm gone. No promises. She pressed her forehead against the cold iron of the balcony railing and smiled at the Florence skyline. Good night, Alfonso. Good night, Talia. On the 4th day, 2 men she didn't recognize appeared near the facility entrance. She clocked them the second time she saw them. Civilian-looking, patient, positioned at opposite ends of the small car park with no apparent reason to be there. He called Alfonso. I know, he said before she could explain. You sent them. Voss still has associates who know your face. You were on that estate for 3 weeks. You're not invisible. Boss. I should have sent them from the first day. I'm sorry. She looked at the 2 men who were doing an excellent job of looking at everything except her. You're impossible, she said. I'm thorough, he said. There's a difference. She thought about arguing. She thought about her father and debt and the way powerful men's problems became other people's disasters. She thought about a hand on her shoulder in a rain-soaked warehouse. About forehead to forehead and shared breath and the discipline it took to stop there. Fine, she said. Thank you, he said. He meant it. He came back on a Tuesday. The car arrived mid-afternoon, and the estate received her the way it always had. Stone walls, cypress trees, the fountain still not running in the winter cold. But Donna Lucia was waiting in the courtyard. Not with ceremony. Just standing there in her black coat with her hands folded, and when she saw Talia she came forward and embraced her. A real embrace, brief and unambiguous, and said against her cheek, Welcome home. Talia's throat tightened. She allowed herself 1 moment of it, then stepped back and composed herself. The tomatoes, she said. 3 new ones ripening, Donna Lucia said, delighted. Come see tomorrow. Alfonso was not in the courtyard. He was in the document room. She hadn't expected it and then immediately couldn't imagine anything else. He was standing at the long table with a document she recognized, part of the restructured foundation filing, making notes in the margin in his precise, architectural handwriting. He looked up when she came in. He didn't say anything for a moment. She set her bag down by the door. Took off her coat. Hung it on the chair she always used. You rearranged it back, she said, looking at the room. I found the logic in your system, he said. It's better. She looked at him. He looked at her. How is your mother? He said. Stable. Better than last week. The specialist thinks we have time. She exhaled. The new care plan starts Monday. It's manageable. For now. The facility fees, he said. Alfonso. Your contract has been extended. 12 months. Retroactive to the first day. He said it simply. The revised agreement is on your desk. You don't have to accept, but the numbers cover the facility through the year. She stared at him. You're not doing this because of last night in my room, she said. I'm doing it because you found a traitor in my household, documented financial crimes that would have destroyed my mother's foundation, and stepped in front of a gun, he said. The work warrants the pay. That's not, she started. That's what I'm putting in the contract, he said steadily. What else it means is separate. She looked at the document on the desk. Her name at the top. The numbers beneath it. Extraordinary, real, the kind that could change the shape of the next year of her life. What else does it mean, she said. He came around the table. Stopped 3 feet from her. It means I want you here, he said. Not because I need a translator. Because... He paused and she watched the discipline it took him to continue. Because the house is different when you're in it. I am different when you're in it. He held her gaze. And I understand if that is not what you want. I understand every reason it shouldn't be. The world I come from, what it cost your father, what it asks of everyone near it. He exhaled. I understand all of it. I'm asking anyway. The room was very quiet. The lamp he'd put on her desk cast its warm light across everything. I know what you're asking, she said. Do you have an answer? Not a simple one. I'm not looking for simple. She looked at him for a long moment. At the tattoo along his wrist. The words she'd translated on her first day and hadn't been able to stop thinking about. Sankayama sang. Blood calls to blood. I'm going to finish the contract, she said. I'm going to do the work. And I'm going to need you to be patient with me. I'm patient with almost nothing, he said. For you I'll learn. That's not reassuring. It's honest. She almost laughed. All right, she said. All right, he said. All right, she said again. And this time it meant something larger. Weeks passed. The estate settled into a new rhythm. The Voss situation concluded in a way that Alfonso explained only in broad terms. Something resolved, something neutralized, the specifics kept from her with a consideration she recognized as deliberate protection rather than condescension. She let him. Some things were not her world to carry. The foundation was restructured. Her documentation went to 3 separate law firms. Donna Lucia's charitable work continued, cleaner now, the architecture of it rebuilt on foundations that couldn't be quietly compromised. Talia finished the primary contract work and started on a secondary project Alfonso proposed. A full audit of the estate's legitimate business holdings, which were more extensive and more legitimate than she'd initially assumed. Construction. Property development. A vineyard in Tuscany that was, as far as she could tell, just a vineyard. She visited her mother twice more. Each time Sal drove her. Each time, 2 men she'd learned to recognize waited patiently in the car park. She stopped arguing about it. Spring arrived in the estate's garden the way it did in old places. Slowly and then all at once. The fountain started running. Donna Lucia's tomatoes came in with improbable ambition. The cypress trees went greener. Alfonso took to joining her in the document room in the late afternoon, not always working, sometimes just present. Sitting with a book while she worked or making calls she wasn't supposed to hear that she learned to tune out. His presence had that quality she discovered of the right kind of quiet, the kind that didn't demand anything. She began to understand gradually and then completely that this was simply how he loved. Through presence. Through arrangement. Through the silent removal of obstacles from her path. The draft from the hallway door had been sealed. Her laptop had been replaced. Better, faster, the exact specifications she would have chosen for herself. A standing arrangement had been made with the specialist in Florence, accessible on short notice. Each thing presented without ceremony, without claim. She stopped noting them individually and started understanding them collectively. One evening in late March, she came to find him on the terrace that looked over the formal garden. He was standing with his back to her, a glass of something dark in his hand, the tattoo across his knuckles visible in the blue dusk light. She stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. The garden was silver and blue in the approaching dark. The cypress trees were very still. I've been thinking, she said, about what my grandmother told me about prayer. He looked at her sideways. She said it was about reminding yourself that some forces are larger than your fear, Talia said. I've been thinking about what it means to not be afraid anymore. Are you not afraid? I'm afraid of many things, she said honestly. But not of this. Not of here. She paused. Not of you. His hand found hers on the terrace railing. Fully. Deliberately. The tattoo pressed against her knuckles. That took longer than it should have, he said quietly. No, she said. It took exactly as long as it needed to. He turned to face her. She turned to face him. The garden breathed around them in the early dark. I love you, he said. It was very simple. Very direct. Without architecture or defense. I have loved you since you corrected my Sicilian dialect and immediately apologized when you didn't need to. I have loved you since you walked into a room where a gun was aimed at my mother and you moved without thinking. I have loved you, his voice dropped, every day of this strange, unplanned, irreversible thing. She looked at him. The man who had been afraid of nothing because he'd had nothing worth losing. Who was afraid now she could see it. afraid of this, of her, of what it would cost if she turned away. "I love you," she said. "Which is the most inconvenient thing that has ever happened to me." He laughed, a full, real, unguarded laugh, and she thought, there it is. That's who he is underneath all that stone. He pulled her close. Not suddenly, with intention. She came against his chest and his arm went around her and his chin came down to the top of her head and they stood there in the blue evening while the garden went to dark around them. This, she thought. This is what I stepped in front of the gun for, even though I didn't know it. She gave him her answer in April. Not to the contract extension. She'd signed that weeks ago quietly without making a thing of it. This was a different answer to a different question, and it was given on a Sunday morning in the greenhouse where Donna Lucia's tomatoes were coming in red and improbable. Donna Lucia was there. She was always there when things mattered, Talia had noticed. Not intrusively but as a kind of witness. The old woman was at the far end of the greenhouse with dirt on her hands and an expression of complete serenity. Alfonso had been asking without asking for a while. The question lived in the space between them, not about love, which was established, which had been spoken and received and had settled into the texture of daily life like something permanent, but about permanence itself. She pulled the rosary beads from her pocket. He looked at them. Then at her. "I've been holding on to these since that night," she said. "I kept meaning to give them back." "My mother noticed," he said. "She said you should keep them." "I know. She told me last week." She turned them over in her fingers. "I want to keep them. I want to stay." A breath. "I want to be in this, properly, completely. Even the parts that are difficult." "Especially the parts that are difficult," he said. "Especially those." She met his eyes. "Is that clear enough?" "Clear enough," he said softly. He took her hand. The rosary beads tangled between their fingers. From the far end of the greenhouse, Donna Lucia made a small, satisfied sound and busied herself with the tomatoes with great theatrical attention. The formal proposal came 3 weeks later in the study with no audience but the fire. A ring that had been his grandmother's. Simple, old, the gold worn to a particular warmth. He put it on her finger without ceremony, which was exactly right. Ceremony was for things that needed proving. This needed nothing proved. "Sang Kayama sang," she said softly, looking at the tattoo along his wrist. He looked at her. "You remember." "The first day," she said. "I recognized it." "What did you think it meant?" "I thought it meant threat," she said. "Now I think it means something else." He turned her hand over. Pressed his lips to her palm. "Yes," he said against her skin. "Something else entirely." The estate in autumn was gold and copper and everything Talia had not expected to be standing inside. She was 6 months pregnant, which she had not expected either, though in retrospect she understood it as entirely consistent with the pattern of her life since walking through a gate she'd thought was temporary. Donna Lucia had wept. Actually wept. Tears running silently down her composed face while her hands clasped Talia's and the rosary beads clicked between them. Finally, she had said. Finally. The vineyard in Tuscany had become, over the past months, something Talia had quietly fallen in love with. The clean business of it, the records that were genuinely just wine production, the way the hills looked in late summer. Alfonso had suggested once that they might spend part of each year there. She had not said no. Her mother had a new specialist, a better room, a care plan that was properly funded and properly monitored. Talia visited every 3 weeks. Her mother asked sometimes about her father, and sometimes recently she asked about him. The one with the serious face. Talia had shown her a photograph once. Her mother had said, "He looks at you like you're the only solid thing in the room." She wasn't wrong. Alfonso stood behind her on the terrace in the October light. His arm around her from behind, hand flat against her stomach. The tattoo along his wrist, Sang Kayama sang, lay against her skin. "You're thinking too much," he said against her hair. Occupational habit. About what? She considered. About how one decision changes everything. About the moment I walked through that door. The loading bay. The loading bay. She leaned back against him. "I've never done anything that impulsive in my life. Before or since." "You were impulsive enough to stay," he said. "That wasn't impulsive. That was calculated." She felt him smile against her temple. "What were the variables?" "Your mother. The greenhouse. The lamp on my desk. Oz. You. He turned her gently. Her hands on his chest, his on her face. The estate spread out behind them in copper and gold. The fountain running, the cypress trees immovable, the garden preparing itself for winter and resurrection. I need you to know, he said, that everything I am is different because of you. Not better in some simple way. Just more honest. More present. The tattoo flexed as his hand curved against her jaw. I spent 17 years being what was required. I intend to spend the rest of them being what is chosen. That's the most beautiful thing you've ever said to me, she said. I'm learning, he said. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it. She pulled him down to her. He came without resistance. Outside the walls, the world continued its dangerous and indifferent operations. Inside them something had been built, not from safety which had never been an option, but from the particular courage of two people who had stood in the same fire and chosen to stay warm. Donna Lucia watched from the garden below, her hands in the dirt, the rosary beads around her wrist catching the light. She said nothing. She only smiled the way people smile when something they have long believed has finally been proven true. Sang Kayama sang. Blood calls to blood. And sometimes, in the cold corridors of inherited power, in the amber light of lamplit document rooms, in rain-soaked warehouses where guns are aimed and women refuse to flinch. Sometimes love is the only force that outlasts everything that was built to stop it. Thank you for reading. If this story moved you, stayed with you, or kept you up past midnight, please like, share, and subscribe. New stories every week.